I was pressed against the barn wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack, when Jake Holloway leaned down, all 6'5" of him, and said the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about myself. "No one else will ever fill you like me, Carter. No one." His voice was low, rough as gravel, and his massive hand was still resting against the weathered wood beside my head, cagging me in. The late summer sun filtered through the gaps in the barn slats, painting golden stripes across his sun-darkened face, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because 3 months ago, I'd been just another straight college kid home for the summer, and now I was staring up at my best friend since childhood, this giant of a man who'd grown up alongside me on neighboring ranches, wondering how the hell I'd ended up here, wondering why his words made something in my chest crack wide open. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started, to the beginning of the summer that changed everything. It was late May when I pulled my beat-up truck into the long gravel driveway of my family's ranch, the Montana sky stretching endless and blue above me. I just finished my junior year at the University of Washington, studying business because that's what my father wanted, dating a girl named Melissa because that's what everyone expected, and generally living the life that had been mapped out for me since birth. The ranch house looked exactly the same as it always had, white paint peeling slightly, the porch swing my grandfather built still creaking in the wind, my mother's flower boxes bursting with early summer blooms. Home. It should have felt like relief after months of cramped dorm rooms and coffee-fueled all-nighters, but instead, it felt like stepping backward into a skin that didn't quite fit anymore. My mother rushed out before I'd even killed the engine, her flour-dusted hands reaching for me before my boots hit the ground. She smelled like bread and lavender, and when she hugged me, I felt something in my chest loosen just slightly. My father appeared a moment later, his weathered face creasing into a rare smile as he clapped me on the shoulder with a hand roughened by decades of ranch work. They asked about school, about Melissa, about whether I was still on track to take over the ranch business after graduation, and I gave them all the right answers while my mind wandered to the sprawling pastures beyond the house, to the mountains rising purple in the distance, to the Holloway Ranch that bordered ours to the east. "Jake's been asking about you," my mother mentioned casually as she led me inside, and something in my stomach jumped. "He's been helping your father with the cattle while you've been gone. That boy's gotten even bigger, if you can believe it, built like an ox now." I could believe it. Jake Holloway had always been big even as kids. He'd towered over me, all gangly limbs and easy strength. We'd grown up together, riding horses across the shared boundary between our properties, swimming in the creek that cut through both ranches, getting into the kind of trouble only rural Montana kids could find. He'd been my best friend for as long as I could remember, the kind of friend who felt like a brother, like family. I hadn't seen him since Christmas, when I'd been home for only a few days, too busy with Melissa and my Seattle friends to spend much time at the ranch. But now I had 3 whole months stretching ahead of me, and the thought of seeing Jake again made me smile for the first time in days. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning I was barely awake, stumbling out to the barn in the pre-dawn darkness to help my father with the feeding, when I heard it, that deep, rumbling laugh that I'd know anywhere. I rounded the corner of the barn and there he was. Jake Holloway, somehow even bigger than I remembered, his broad shoulders straining against a faded denim work shirt, his worn cowboy hat pushed back on his head as he hefted a hay bale like it weighed nothing. The rising sun caught his profile, the strong jaw dark with stubble, the straight nose, the laugh lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes, and for a second I just stood there, staring like an idiot. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Jake called out when he spotted me, his face breaking into a grin that made something warm unfurl in my chest. He dropped the hay bale and crossed the distance between us in a few long strides, and before I could say anything, he'd pulled me into a hug that lifted me clean off my feet. I was 6 feet tall and solid from years of ranch work, but Jake made me feel small. He always had. "Damn, Carter, thought you'd forgotten about us country folks." "As if I could forget you," I said, punching his shoulder when he set me down. "You're too ugly to forget." He laughed, the sound rolling through the quiet morning, and I found myself grinning back despite the strange flutter in my stomach. This was Jake, my best friend, the guy who taught me to ride when I was 5, who'd helped me sneak my first beer when we were 15, who'd punched Tommy Reeves in the face junior year when Tommy tried to spread rumors about my sister. There was nothing strange about being happy to see him. Nothing strange at all. We fell back into our old rhythm as if no time had passed, working side by side in the barns, riding out to check the fence lines, staying up late on my porch drinking beer and talking about everything and nothing. But something was different this time, something I couldn't quite name. I kept catching myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way his forearms corded with muscle when he worked. The way he'd push his hat back when he was thinking, revealing those storm-gray eyes. The way he'd rest his hand on my shoulder when he talked to me, his palm warm and heavy, and how I'd find myself leaning into that touch without meaning to. I told myself I was just glad to be home, glad to be away from the pressure of school and my father's expectations. I told myself the weird awareness I felt around Jake was just because I'd been gone so long, because I'd forgotten what it was like to be around someone so comfortable and familiar. I told myself a lot of things that first week, and I almost believed them. Then came the night, everything shifted. It was a Saturday, and the annual county fair was in full swing in town. Jake and I had been going together since we were kids. It was tradition, something we looked forward to all year. We loaded into his truck, the same battered Ford he'd had since high school, and headed into town as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The fair was exactly as I remembered, the Ferris wheel lights cutting through the gathering dusk, the smell of fried food and livestock, the sounds of carnival games and country music drifting on the warm air. We wandered through the crowds, running into people we'd gone to high school with, most of whom had stayed in town, gotten married, started families. They greeted Jake like a hero, everyone loved him here, and he deflected their attention with his usual easy charm. We were standing in line for corn dogs when I felt it, that prickle on the back of my neck that told me someone was watching. I turned and saw Emma Richardson, a girl I'd dated briefly senior year, staring at me from across the midway. She was pretty in that wholesome girl-next-door way, with honey blonde hair and a bright smile, and when she caught my eye, she started walking over. I felt Jake tense beside me, though I couldn't imagine why. "Carter Hayes, as I live and breathe," Emma said, her voice warm and flirtatious. "I heard you were back in town. You look good." "Thanks, Emma, you too," I replied, because it was true and because it was the polite thing to say. We made small talk for a few minutes. She asked about school, I asked about her job at her father's hardware store, and the whole time I could feel Jake's presence beside me like a physical weight. When Emma suggested we should get coffee sometime, catch up properly, I agreed without really thinking about it, and she beamed before walking away with a promise to text me. "You gonna go?" Jake asked once she was out of earshot. His voice was carefully neutral, but something in his posture had gone stiff. "I don't know, maybe. Why?" I glanced up at him, confused by the sudden tension radiating off him. "No reason," he said, but he didn't quite meet my eyes. "Come on, let's get on the Ferris wheel before the line gets too long." The Ferris wheel had always been our thing. We'd ride it every year, usually as the night was winding down, sitting in the swaying seat and looking out over the fairgrounds, over the whole valley spread out below us. We climbed into the metal seat, and the operator locked the bar across our laps. And then we were rising, the ground falling away beneath us. Jake's shoulder pressed against mine in the small space, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of every point of contact between us, his thigh against my thigh, his arm brushing mine, the heat of him in the cooling night air. "Missed this," Jake said quietly as we reached the top, the wheel pausing to let more passengers on below. The whole valley stretched out before us, dark fields dotted with distant farmhouse lights, the mountains black shadows against the star-filled sky. "Missed you." "I missed you too," I said, and meant it more than I'd realized. In Seattle, surrounded by classmates and professors and Melissa's friends, I'd felt disconnected, like I was playing a part in someone else's life. But here with Jake, I felt real, solid, like myself. It's good to be home. We sat in silence for a moment, the Ferris wheel beginning to turn again, carrying us back down toward the lights and noise. Then Jake spoke again, his voice so low I almost didn't hear him over the carnival sounds. "You really like her, Emma?" I blinked, surprised by the question, I don't know her anymore, really. Why? Just seems like everyone's always trying to set you up with someone, he said, and there was something in his tone I couldn't identify. First that girl from college, now Emma, like they can't imagine you alone. Melissa and I aren't that serious, I said, which was true. We'd been dating for almost a year, but it felt more like going through the motions than anything real. She was nice, pretty, from a good family, everything my parents wanted for me. But when I was with her, I felt like I was watching my life happen from a distance. We're probably going to break up. Actually, it's just, I don't know, expected, I guess. Expected, Jake repeated, and something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like pain. You ever think about doing something that isn't expected? Before I could answer, the Ferris wheel lurched to a stop at the bottom, and the operator was unlocking our bar, and the moment shattered. We climbed out, rejoining the flow of people, and Jake didn't bring it up again. But his questions stayed with me, echoing in my mind as we drove home in comfortable silence, as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. Did I ever think about doing something unexpected? The answer, I was starting to realize, was yes. Yes, I did. The summer heat intensified as June rolled into July, and with it, something else began to build, a tension between Jake and me that I couldn't name, couldn't understand. Little moments that felt charged, loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. The way his hand would linger on my back when he was showing me something. The way his eyes would track me when he thought I wasn't looking. The way my heart would speed up when he'd laugh at something I said, like his approval mattered more than anyone else's. We were working on repairing a section of fence one scorching afternoon, the sun beating down mercilessly, when Jake pulled off his shirt, using it to wipe the sweat from his face. I'd seen him shirtless 1,000 times. We'd swum together, worked together, lived in each other's pockets for years. But this time, my eyes caught on the broad expanse of his chest, the muscles shifting under sun-darkened skin, the trail of dark hair disappearing into the waistband of his jeans. My mouth went dry, and I looked away quickly, feeling heat that had nothing to do with the sun crawling up my neck. What the hell was wrong with me? You okay? Jake asked, and I realized I'd been standing there, frozen, staring at nothing. Yeah, just hot, I managed, forcing myself to focus on the fence post in front of me. There's a creek about a quarter mile that way, he said, pointing toward a stand of cottonwoods. Want to take a break, cool off? I nodded, not trusting my voice, and we walked through the tall grass toward the trees. The creek was exactly where he'd said it would be, a clear, cold stream running over smooth stones, cottonwoods providing blessed shade. Without hesitating, Jake kicked off his boots and waded in, jeans and all, sighing with relief as the water hit his overheated skin. I followed, the cold shock of the water stealing my breath, washing away the sweat and dust, and the weird tension that had been building in my chest all day. We floated on our backs, letting the current carry us, the cottonwood leaves whispering above us. It was peaceful, perfect, the kind of moment that made me remember why I loved this place, this life, why the thought of leaving it again in September made my chest ache. You ever think about staying? Jake asked, his voice drifting across the water. Staying here after graduation, taking over your dad's ranch like he wants. I was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. I don't know, it's complicated. What's complicated about it? Jake had drifted closer, close enough that I could see the water droplets caught in his dark lashes, the way the dappled sunlight played across his face. You love it here. I can see it in the way you look at everything, like you're trying to memorize it, like you know you're going to have to leave it behind. He wasn't wrong. My father has all these plans for me, I said slowly. Business school, MBA, running the ranch like a corporation, making it bigger, more efficient. He wants me to be something I'm not sure I want to be. So don't, Jake said simply, be what you want instead. And what if I don't know what I want? Jake's eyes found mine, and something in his gaze made my breath catch. I think you know, he said softly. I think you're just scared to admit it. The water suddenly felt too cold, and the space between us felt too small. I stood up, water streaming off me, my heart pounding for reasons I didn't want to examine. We should get back to work. Jake didn't argue, but as we walked back to the fence line in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, something fundamental and irreversible. Things got worse after that, or better, or different. I couldn't decide which. I became hyper-aware of every interaction, every casual touch, every moment Jake's eyes lingered on me just a second too long. And worse, I became aware of my own reactions, the way my pulse would jump when he was near, the way I found myself making excuses to stay close to him, the way I'd catch myself staring at his hands, his mouth, the strong column of his throat. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. I tried to create distance, spending more time helping my father with paperwork, taking solo rides to check distant fence lines, even calling Emma and taking her to dinner one night just to prove to myself that I was normal, that whatever weirdness I was feeling around Jake was just temporary insanity brought on by too much sun and isolation. The dinner with Emma was fine. She was sweet, funny, easy to talk to. But when she leaned in to kiss me goodnight on her doorstep, I felt nothing. Just a vague sense of obligation and guilt as I kissed her back, thinking the whole time about storm-gray eyes and calloused hands and a laugh that made my chest warm. When I got home, Jake's truck was parked in my driveway. He was sitting on my porch steps, still in his work clothes, a beer dangling from his fingers. The porch light cast his face in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me as I climbed out of my truck. "How was your date?" he asked, and his voice was flat, emotionless. "Fine," I said carefully, climbing the steps to sit beside him. "Emma's nice." "You gonna see her again?" "I don't know, maybe." I looked at him, trying to read his expression in the dim light. "Why do you care?" "I don't," he said too quickly. Then he stood abruptly, his beer bottle clattering against the porch. "Forget it, I should go." "Jake," I stood too, catching his arm before he could leave. His skin was warm under my palm, the muscles tense. "What's going on with you? You've been weird for weeks." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been weird. That's Rich Carter. You're the one who can barely look at me anymore." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He turned to face me fully, and in the porch light, I could see the frustration etched across his features, something desperate in his eyes. "Ever since that day at the creek, you've been avoiding me, taking solo rides, working with your dad, going on dates with girls you don't even like. If you want space from me, just say so." "I don't want space from you," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. I stopped, because I didn't know how to finish that sentence. What? I just can't stop thinking about you. I just feel like I'm going crazy every time you're near me. I just don't understand what's happening to me." "You just what?" Jake pressed, stepping closer. He was so tall, so broad, that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "Talk to me, Carter. We've been friends our whole lives. Whatever it is, you can tell me." But I couldn't, because I didn't have words for the confusion swirling inside me, for the way my world had tilted on its axis and nothing felt stable anymore. Because admitting what I was feeling, what I suspected I was feeling, would mean confronting truths about myself that I wasn't ready to face. "I can't," I whispered. Something in Jake's expression cracked, and for a moment I saw raw pain flash across his face. Then he stepped back, putting distance between us, and his features smoothed into careful blankness. "Right. Well, when you figure it out, you know where to find me." He was off the porch, and in his truck before I could stop him, red taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time after he'd gone, my hand still tingling where I'd touched his arm, my heart aching with something I couldn't name. I didn't see Jake for 3 days after that. He didn't come by to help with the ranch work, didn't text, didn't call. His absence was a physical ache, worse than I could have imagined. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that maybe distance would help me get my head straight, but it didn't. If anything, missing him made everything clearer and more terrifying. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I saddled my horse and rode the 2 miles to the Holloway Ranch, my heart in my throat. I found Jake in the barn, mucking out stalls, and when he looked up and saw me, something complicated crossed his face, relief and wariness, and something else I couldn't identify. "Hey," I said, dismounting and tying my horse to the fence. "Hey," he replied, leaning on his pitchfork. We stood there in awkward silence, The easy comfort that had always existed between us fractured and strange. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry I've been weird. I'm sorry I can't explain what's going on. I miss you. I miss my best friend." Jake was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was fighting with himself. Then he set down the pitchfork and crossed the distance between us. "I miss you too," he said softly, "but Carter, I need you to know something." "Okay." He took a breath, and I could see his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "I'm gay." The words hung in the air between us, and for a second, I couldn't process them. Jake was watching me carefully, his whole body tense, and I realized he was waiting for my reaction, afraid of it. "Oh," I said, because it was the only word my brain could form. Then, more intelligently, "Thank you for telling me." "You're not freaked out?" "No," I said, and meant it. If anything, I felt relieved, like a puzzle piece had clicked into place, even if I didn't fully understand the picture yet. "You're still you, still my best friend. This doesn't change that." Something in Jake's shoulders loosened, and he let out a breath he'd been holding. "I've known for a long time," he said quietly. "Since we were teenagers, probably. I never knew how to tell you. And then you went to college and started dating that girl, and I thought maybe it was better if I didn't say anything." "Jake." "But then you came home this summer," he continued, and now he was looking at me with such intensity that I couldn't look away. "And I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep watching you go through the motions with girls you don't care about, living the life everyone expects you to live. Because I know you, Carter, better than anyone, and I know when you're lying to yourself." My heart was hammering now, my mouth dry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I see you," Jake said, stepping closer. "The real you, not the version you perform for your parents or your Seattle friends or Emma Richardson. And that version, the real you, he's not happy. He's not living the life he wants." "And you think you know what life I want?" I asked, and I meant it to come out challenging, but instead it came out desperate, pleading. "No," Jake said softly, "but I think you do. I think you've known for a while now. You're just too scared to admit it." He was right. God help me, he was right. Standing there in that barn, with the afternoon sun slanting through the gaps in the walls and the smell of hay and horses surrounding us, I knew. I'd known for weeks, maybe longer. Known it in the way my heart raced when Jake smiled at me, in the way I felt more myself with him than I ever did with Melissa, in the way my whole body came alive when he was near. I'd just been too terrified to acknowledge it, too afraid of what it meant about who I was, about the life I'd always assumed I'd have. "I don't know how to do this," I whispered. "Do what?" "Be whatever this is," I gestured helplessly between us. I don't know how to be anything other than what everyone expects." Jake's expression softened, and he reached out slowly, giving me time to move away if I wanted to. When I didn't, his hand came to rest on my shoulder, warm and steady and achingly familiar. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said gently. "You don't have to be anything or anyone, just let yourself feel what you feel. Stop running from it." I looked up at him, this man I'd known my entire life, who'd been my constant, my anchor, my best friend, and let myself really see him for the first time. See the way he was looking at me like I was something precious. See the hope and fear warring in his eyes. See the truth that had probably been there all along if I'd been brave enough to look. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I know," Jake said. "Me too." We stood there, his hand on my shoulder, the space between us charged with possibility and terror. I wanted to kiss him. The realization crashed over me like a wave. I wanted to kiss him so badly I could barely breathe. But I couldn't, not yet. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. "I need time," I said, "to figure this out, to figure out me." Jake nodded, stepping back, and I immediately missed his warmth. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." But that was the problem, wasn't it? The summer was slipping away. In 6 weeks, I'd be back at school, back to my old life. And whatever this was between us, whatever it could be, felt as fragile and fleeting as the Montana summer. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. Jake and I fell back into our old patterns, working together, riding together, spending long evenings on my porch or his, talking about everything except the elephant in the room. But everything felt different now, charged with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Every casual touch made my skin electric. Every time he laughed, my chest ached with want. Every night I lay in bed thinking about him, trying to understand this new version of myself that was emerging, terrified, and exhilarated in equal measure. I broke up with Melissa over the phone. She took it well, better than I deserved, and when she asked why, I told her the truth, that I wasn't being fair to her, that I wasn't the person she thought I was. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Carter." After we hung up, I sat on my bed for a long time, feeling lighter and more scared than I'd ever been. I also started doing research. Late at night, in the privacy of my room, I read articles and forums and coming-out stories, trying to find myself in other people's experiences. It was terrifying and validating and overwhelming all at once. I learned words like bisexual and fluid and queer, and tried them on like ill-fitting clothes, seeing which ones felt right. I learned that sexuality wasn't always neat and binary, that it was okay to be confused, that I wasn't alone in this late-blooming realization. But most importantly, I learned that the feelings I had for Jake, the way my world felt brighter when he was in it, the way my body responded to his nearness, the way I wanted to know every part of him, that those feelings were real and valid and okay. But knowing something in my head and accepting it in my heart were two different things. One night in late July, Jake and I drove out to a spot we'd loved as teenagers, a hilltop on the edge of his property where you could see for miles in every direction. We brought beer and blankets and lay on our backs under the vast Montana sky, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of light. We'd done this hundreds of times before, but this time felt different, important. "You leave in 3 weeks," Jake said quietly. "I know. Have you thought about what happens then?" I'd thought about little else. "I don't know," I admitted. "My whole life is in Seattle, my classes, my apartment, my friends, but being here this summer, being with you, it feels more real than any of that ever did." "So stay." I turned my head to look at him, finding his profile silhouetted against the stars. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" He rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at me. "Why can't it be simple? You love it here. You'd be happy running your family's ranch. You could have a good life here." "With you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes searched mine in the darkness. "If you wanted, yeah, with me." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Jake, I don't know how to be with someone, with a guy, I don't know if I even can." "You're overthinking it," he said softly, and then his hand was cupping my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. "It's just me, Carter, just us, the same as it's always been, except now we're honest about it." "What if I screw it up?" The words tumbled out, all my fear and insecurity spilling over. "What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm not brave enough to be who I really am?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Jake said. "But you have to let yourself try. You have to stop being so afraid of what everyone else will think and start living for yourself." He was so close now, his face inches from mine, and I could feel the warmth of his breath, could see the vulnerability in his eyes. He was giving me a choice, a real choice, and I knew that whatever I decided in this moment would determine the course of my entire life. I could go back to Seattle, finish school, find a nice girl to marry, take over my father's ranch, live the safe, expected life that everyone wanted for me. I could bury this summer deep inside myself and pretend it never happened. Or I could be brave. I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It was nothing like kissing Melissa or Emma or any of the girls I'd dated before. This was fire and electricity and coming home all at once. Jake made a sound in his throat, surprise and relief and want, and his hand tightened on my face as he kissed me back. His lips were warm and firm and perfect, and when his tongue traced the seam of my mouth, I opened for him without hesitation. The world fell away until there was nothing but this, his mouth on mine, his hand in my hair, the solid weight of him as he shifted to cover me, the stars wheeling overhead in their ancient dance. We kissed until my lips were swollen, until I was dizzy with lack of oxygen, until every doubt and fear had burned away in the heat between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against mine. "Tell me this is real," he whispered. "Tell me you're not going to wake up tomorrow and regret this." "It's real," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. "I don't regret it. I could never regret you." We kissed again, slower this time, sweeter, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for weeks. The desire, the affection, the bone-deep certainty that this was right, that he was right, that maybe, just maybe, I could be brave enough to choose this. When we finally drove home in the early hours of the morning, my hand linked with his across the center console, I felt like a different person than the one who'd arrived in Montana 2 months ago. Somewhere along the way, I'd shed the skin of who I thought I was supposed to be and found something truer underneath. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and I'd never felt more alive. The rest of July passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing certainty. We were careful around others. Montana wasn't exactly known for its progressive attitudes, and neither of us was ready for the scrutiny that would come with being openly together. But in private, we explored this new dimension of our relationship with wonder and passion, and sometimes fumbling awkwardness that made us laugh. Jake was patient with me as I navigated my own internalized fears and doubts. There were moments when the weight of what I was doing, the life I was potentially choosing, would crash over me and I'd panic, pulling away, retreating into my head. And every time Jake would give me space, would let me work through it, would be there when I was ready to come back. He never pushed, never demanded more than I was ready to give. He just loved me, steadily and surely, until I learned to love myself the same way. But as August approached, reality began to intrude. My father started talking more seriously about my plans for the fall semester, about the internship he'd arranged for me at an agricultural corporation, about my future. My mother noticed something different about me, the way I smiled more, the way I seemed lighter, and asked if I'd met someone. I told her I had, letting her assume it was Emma, hatting myself for the lie of omission. And every day, the deadline loomed closer. 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week until I had to get in my truck and drive back to Seattle, back to my old life. Jake didn't bring it up, but I could see the question in his eyes every time he looked at me. "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. The night before I was supposed to leave, we met at the barn on my family's property, the same barn where this had all started, in a way. The same barn where Jake had told me he was gay, where the first cracks in my carefully constructed life had appeared. I'd texted him to meet me there after dinner, knowing we needed to talk, knowing I couldn't leave things unresolved between us. He was waiting when I arrived, leaning against the barn wall in the fading evening light, and the sight of him made my chest ache. He'd become so precious to me in such a short time, or maybe he'd always been precious, and I'd just finally let myself acknowledge it. "Hey," I said, my voice rough. "Hey," he replied, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the wariness in his eyes. He knew why I'd asked him here. I walked across the dusty barn floor and stopped in front of him, close enough to touch, but not touching, my heart hammering. "I've been thinking," I started. "That sounds dangerous," Jake said, trying for lightness, but I could hear the fear underneath. "I'm not going back to Seattle." The words hung in the air between us, and I watched Jake's face transform, confusion, then hope, then careful neutrality. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm staying here. I'm going to call the university tomorrow and withdraw for the semester, maybe longer. I'm going to talk to my father about taking a more active role in running the ranch." I took a breath, gathering my courage. "I'm going to stop living the life everyone else wants for me and start living mine." "Carter." "I know it's crazy," I rushed on. "I know it's going to disappoint my father, that my mother's going to worry, that everyone in town is going to have opinions. I know it's going to be hard and scary and complicated. But Jake, I can't," my voice broke, and I had to stop, collect myself. "I can't go back to pretending. I can't go back to being that person who was just going through the motions. You asked me once if I ever thought about doing something unexpected. Well, this is it. This is me choosing what I want instead of what I'm supposed to want." "And what do you want?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at him, this giant of a man with the gentlest heart I'd ever known, and let him see everything I felt written across my face. You, I said simply, I want you, I want this. I want to wake up every morning on this land and work side by side with you and go to bed every night knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I want to be brave enough to be myself, and I want to do it with you beside me. For a long moment, Jake just stared at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Then he moved, fast despite his size, closing the distance between us and pulling me into his arms. He held me so tight I could barely breathe, his face buried in my neck, and I could feel him shaking. I love you, he said against my skin. I've loved you for so long, Carter. I never let myself hope that you could feel the same. I love you too, I whispered back, the words feeling both new and ancient on my tongue. I think maybe I always have, I just didn't know what it was. He pulled back just enough to cup my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. Are you sure about this? About staying? About us? Because once everyone knows, once your father knows, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said, and I was. For the first time in my life, I was completely, absolutely sure. I don't want to go back, I want to go forward with you. Jake's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, bright and warm and full of promise. And then he was kissing me, and I was kissing him back, and the future I'd been so afraid of suddenly felt full of possibility instead of fear. We stayed in that barn for hours, talking and planning and dreaming. We talked about how we'd handle my father's reaction, carefully, honestly. We talked about how we'd navigate being together in a small town that might not understand, together, always together. We talked about the ranch, about possibly combining our family's properties one day, about building a life that honored where we came from while being true to who we were. And between the serious conversations, we laughed and kissed and held each other, marveling at how something that had seemed so impossible a few months ago now felt inevitable. It was nearly midnight when we finally left the barn, and as we walked out into the cool Montana night, Jake pulled me against his side, his arm heavy and warm across my shoulders. No one else will ever feel you like me, he said, echoing the words that had started all of this. But this time, there was no desperation in his voice, no uncertainty, just quiet certainty and love. I know, I replied, leaning into him. I don't want anyone else, just you. Above us, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and ahead of us, the future stretched unknown and challenging and beautiful. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because whatever came next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. I'd be facing it with him. The next few months were harder than I'd anticipated, but also better. My father took the news about me withdrawing from school about as well as I'd expected, which is to say, not well at all. There were arguments, tears, mostly my mother's, and more than one door slammed in frustration. But when I finally gathered the courage to tell them about Jake, about us, something shifted. My mother cried, yes, but then she hugged me and told me she just wanted me to be happy. My father was quiet for a long time, then asked if Jake was good to me. When I said yes, he nodded and said that was what mattered, even if he didn't fully understand it. It was more than I'd dared to hope for. The town's reaction was mixed. Some people were supportive, others disappeared from our lives entirely, and still others made their displeasure known in small, petty ways. But Jake and I faced it together, and gradually, as people saw that we were serious, that we weren't going anywhere, that we were just two people trying to build a life together, most of them came around, or at least learned to leave us alone. We didn't combine the ranches right away. That would take years of planning and legal work, but we did start working more closely together, coordinating our herds and resources, planning for a future that included both families' legacies. I took over more responsibilities from my father, finally putting my business education to use in ways that actually mattered to me. And slowly, carefully, we built a life that was ours. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, times when the weight of being different in a traditional community felt crushing, instances when I wondered if I'd made the right choice. But every time those doubts crept in, I'd look at Jake, working beside me in the fields, laughing at something stupid I'd said, reaching for my hand in the darkness of our bedroom, and I'd know with absolute certainty that I had. Because this was real, this was true. This was me finally, after 21 years of pretending, living authentically. And it was worth every difficult conversation, every judgmental look, every sacrifice. 1 year later, almost to the day from when I'd first come home that summer, Jake and I stood on that same hilltop where I'd first kissed him. The valley stretched out below us, golden in the late summer light, our combined herds grazing peacefully across the fields. Jake's hand was warm in mine, his thumb tracing absent circles on my palm, and I felt that same sense of rightness I'd felt that first night under the stars. "You know what I was thinking about?" Jake asked, his voice soft. "What?" "That day in the barn, when I told you no one else would ever feel you like me." He glanced at me, a smile playing at his lips. I was terrified I'd gone too far, that I'd ruined everything between us. "You almost did," I admitted. "I was so scared of what I was feeling, of what it meant. I wanted to run so badly." "But you didn't." "No," I agreed, squeezing his hand. "I stayed. Best decision I ever made." Jake turned to face me fully, bringing his free hand up to cup my face with that familiar gentleness that still made my heart race. "I love you, Carter Hayes." "I love you too," I said, and it was as true now as it had been that first time I'd said it, maybe even more so. Because now I understood the weight of those words, the promise they contained, the future we were building together. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and I kissed him back with a year's worth of love and gratitude and joy. When we broke apart, both smiling like idiots, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "Come on," Jake said, tugging me toward his truck. "Your mom invited us for dinner, remember, and you know how she gets if we're late." We drove down from the hilltop as the first stars began to appear, my hand still linked with his, talking about tomorrow's work and next week's plans and all the small, ordinary moments that made up a life. And I thought about that boy I'd been a year ago, confused, scared, living a life that wasn't his, and I wished I could tell him it would all be okay, that the fear was worth it, that choosing himself, choosing love, choosing truth, it would be the hardest and best thing he ever did. Because now I knew what real happiness felt like. I knew what it meant to be whole, to be seen, to be loved exactly as I was. And Jake had been right that day in the barn, all those months ago. No one else had ever filled me the way he did. No one else ever would. The end. Final message to viewers. Thank you so much for staying with Carter and Jake's journey until the very end. If this story touched your heart, moved you, or made you feel something real, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Drop a like if you believed in their love, and let me know in the comments, what was your favorite moment between Carter and Jake?